In our community, I was respected and called Mama Ginny, but in my own family, I was just an old woman. My son and his wife decided my age was a weakness and my modesty was poverty, and they humiliated me in front of everyone. They forgot the most important rule. Wisdom and power are often hidden behind a quiet smile and a simple dress. Dear friends, your comments and support mean the world to us. Tell us, what challenges have you faced in life, or maybe you're facing right now? Like this video and write where you are watching us from. We will be happy to send you our regards. So stay with us. Don't miss what's coming next. My name is Virginia Henderson, but for the last 40 years, in my corner of the Shaw neighborhood in Washington, D.C., everyone has known me as Mama Ginny. My public story is a simple one, written in the petals of the flowers I sell. I am the widow who raised a good son on her own. I am the quiet woman who runs Virginia's garden, a small, fragrant oasis of calm on a busy city block. My hands are stained with soil, my clothes usually smell faintly of roses and earth, and my life to the outside world is as humble and as sweet as the bouquets I arrange. It is a good life, a respected life, but it is also a carefully constructed fiction. The truth is, my greatest venture was never the flower shop. My true garden, the one I tended to in secret, was a portfolio of investments and businesses that had grown silently and steadily in the fertile soil of my city. I was not just Mama Ginny, the florist. I was V.H. Henderson, the founder of a private financial firm that bore my name. This was my secret, a truth I had guarded for decades. Not out of shame, but out of a fierce, protective love for my son. I had seen what unearned wealth could do to a young man's character, and I wanted my Andre to build his own life, to learn the value of hard work, to believe his success was entirely his own. It was a beautiful, naive, and ultimately foolish dream, and the day it died was on my 68th birthday. The party was held in the community hall of our church, a place that had been the bedrock of my life since I first moved to Shaw. The room was filled with the people who were my true family, my neighbors, my fellow congregants, the small business owners I had helped over the years. The air smelled of fried chicken, sweet potato pie, and the heady scent of the hundreds of lilies I had brought from my shop. It was supposed to be a celebration of a life quietly lived. Instead, it became the stage for my public execution. The first shot was fired by my daughter-in-law, Danielle. She stood beside my son, a vision in a silk dress that probably cost more than my shop's monthly electricity bill, her diamonds flashing under the fluorescent lights. She surveyed the humble hall, the potluck dishes, the simple, heartfelt decorations, and her lips curled into a faint, contemptuous sneer. I saw her whisper something to Andre, and he laughed, a sound that was sharp and dismissive. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I had never been able to fool myself about Danielle. She was beautiful, ambitious, and she had married my son, but she had never respected his mother. To her, and to her wealthy family from their sprawling mansion in Prince George's County, I was the poor, quaint relative from the city, a folksy anecdote to be pitied, a project to be managed. She chose her moment perfectly. When Pastor Brown called for everyone's attention to say a few words in my honor, Danielle stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on Andre's arm. "If I may say something first," she said, her voice smooth and loud. Carrying across the silent room, she smiled, a bright predatory flash of white teeth. "Andre and I are just so proud of everything his mother has tried to accomplish. It's so sad, really, living in that tiny little house behind her flower shop wearing the same old clothes. We just want her to know that even though she's barely scraping by, she'll always have a place at our much bigger, much nicer table." The room was filled with a thick, uncomfortable silence. She wasn't finished. She turned to me, her smile tightening, and her voice dropped to a venomous hiss meant for me, but loud enough for the first few tables to hear. "You are such a tasteless old woman. You're just angry that my parents have money and all you have is this pathetic little shop." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my chest to my cheeks. Every eye in the room was on me. But the deepest cut, the one that severed something deep inside me, came from my own son. Andre, the boy I'd raised, the man whose every success I had secretly engineered, just smirked. He squeezed Danielle's hand and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "She's right, Mom. You're just jealous of our success. Why don't you admit it? The Wainwrights understand business. Your time is over, your little flower shop. It's not serious." My time was over. My life's work, a joke. My son, a stranger. In that moment, the door to the part of my heart that held my love and hope for him, a door I had kept open for 40 years, quietly clicked shut. The pain was so immense it was clarifying. I took a deep breath. I smiled, and I decided right then and there to burn their world to the ground. The silence in the church hall was a thick, ringing void. Every eye was fixed on me, their expressions a mixture of pity and secondhand shame. They had just witnessed a son and his wife publicly humiliate their own mother, and the sheer, callous cruelty of it had stunned them into stillness. Danielle was still basking in the glow of her perceived victory, a smug, satisfied smirk on her face. Andre looked uncomfortable, but not regretful. The look of a weak man who knows he has done something wrong but is too cowardly to defy the person who led him there. They expected me to weep, to shrink, to retreat in the face of their attack. They had no idea they were not fighting a tired old florist. They had just declared war on a queen, and they had done it in the middle of her own throne room. I let the silence stretch, letting their ugly words hang in the air like a foul odor. Then I smiled. It was not a smile of forgiveness. It was a smile of pure, crystalline clarity, the smile of a woman who had just been handed the gift of a perfect and righteous anger. I raised my hand, a gesture that was both a request for quiet and a commanding of the stage. "Danielle, darling," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick atmosphere with the clean edge of a sharpened blade. What a passionate speech! And since we're on the subject of family finances, I continued, my smile never wavering, I have a small favor to ask. When you see your parents this evening, could you please ask them to return the $3 million they borrowed from my company? The quarterly interest payment is now 6 months overdue, and my board is becoming rather insistent. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The silence that followed was no longer just uncomfortable, it was electric. Danielle's face, which had been flushed with triumphant pride, went a ghostly, chalky white. The smug smirk dissolved as if it had been wiped away by an invisible hand. Andre stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, a look of utter, uncomprehending confusion on his face. He looked from me to his wife and back again, his mind unable to process the words I'd just spoken. $3 million, my company. The phrases did not compute in the carefully constructed reality he lived in, a reality where his mother was a poor, struggling florist to be pitied and managed. You see, my life has been a long and complicated exercise in deception. When my husband James died in a tragic construction accident, I was left with a 6-year-old son, a mountain of grief, and $214 in a checking account. The world was not a kind place for a young black widow in the 1970s, so I did what I had to do to survive. I worked. I took a job scrubbing floors in an office building downtown from midnight to dawn, the acrid smell of chemical cleaners clinging to me like a second skin. Then I'd rush home, get Andre ready for school, and work a 6-hour shift as a cashier at the local giant food, my smile bright and my feet aching. In the evenings, I tended to the small garden in our backyard, selling bouquets of roses and black-eyed Susans on the street corner for a few extra dollars. My life was a blur of exhaustion, but in that struggle, I learned 2 things. First, I was stronger than I ever thought possible. Second, I was smarter. While cleaning those downtown offices, I started reading the documents left on the desks, financial reports, investment prospectuses, market analyses. I didn't just read them. I studied them. I began to understand the language of money, the secret currents that moved beneath the surface of the city's economy. At the grocery store, I watched the owner, a good man but a terrible businessman, make mistake after mistake. I started offering him quiet, unsolicited advice on his inventory, on his payroll, on how to manage his cash flow. In 6 months, his store went from being on the brink of failure to turning a profit. He was so grateful he gave me a small bonus and a new title, business manager. That was the beginning. Word spread through the community. Other small business owners, the baker, the barber, the owner of the local hardware store, started coming to me for help. "Mama Ginny," they'd say, "can you take a look at my books?" I did, and I helped them thrive. I started with a simple consulting fee, but then I had a better idea. I began investing my own small savings in their businesses, taking a small equity stake. I had a gift for it. I could see the potential in people and ideas that the big banks overlooked. Over the next 40 years, my flower shop, which became a real thriving business in its own right, served as the quiet, unassuming front for Henderson Financial Consulting. My small secret investments grew into a formidable portfolio. I owned commercial real estate. I held significant stakes in dozens of successful local businesses. I was not just a florist, I was a kingmaker. I kept it all a secret for one reason, Andre. I wanted my son to have the drive, the ambition, the hunger that comes from believing you have to make your own way in the world. I didn't want to raise a soft, entitled man who had never known a day of struggle. So I lived my humble life, driving my old pickup truck, wearing my simple clothes, and I let him believe we were always just one bad month away from trouble. I funded his private high school and his entire Howard University education through an anonymous scholarship foundation I had created. When he wanted to start his own accounting firm, I didn't give him the money. Instead, I secretly sent him his first 5 major clients. Businesses I secretly controlled. I used my immense financial leverage to quietly guarantee his business loans, so the bank saw him as a blue-chip prospect. I built a scaffolding of invisible support all around him, and I let him believe he had climbed to the top all by himself. It was, I see now, a beautiful lie, but one that left him vulnerable to the poison of a family like the Wainwrights. They had come to me 4 years ago, a portrait of desperate, wealthy people on the verge of ruin. Their restaurant empire was built on a mountain of debt, and it was all about to collapse. They had sat in my simple living room, their crocodile tears soaking my good upholstery, and begged me to save them. Not for them, they had insisted, but for Danielle, for Andre, for the sake of the family. And I, a fool for my son's happiness, had agreed. I had loaned them $3 million, structured as a private investment to save them from the public humiliation of a bank loan. And now, they were not just refusing to pay their debt, they were trying to erase the debtor. The shock in the room was a tangible thing, a physical force that sucked all the air out of the church hall. My words, spoken with such quiet, lethal precision, had landed like a bomb, and the fallout was a cloud of stunned, absolute silence. I watched with a strange detached calm as the color drained from Danielle's perfectly made-up face. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The diamonds on her ears, which had seemed so bright and powerful just moments before, now looked like cheap, gaudy bits of glass. Her performance of wealth and status had been revealed for what it was. A costume, paid for with my money, a loan she had clearly believed would never be called in. My son, Andre, looked even more lost. His face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending bewilderment. His entire life, his entire understanding of his own success, of his mother's place in the world, had been built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies, and that foundation had just been pulverized before his eyes. He looked from my face to his wife's, searching for a cue, for a script, for someone to tell him what his role was in this strange, terrifying new play. But no one spoke. The entire community, my friends and neighbors, simply stared. their minds reeling as they tried to reconcile the image of Mama Ginny, the humble florist, with the woman who had just casually mentioned a $3 million loan. I did not stay to watch the aftermath. My purpose at that party was complete. I had not come for a celebration as it turned out. I had come to draw a line. I had been publicly disrespected, and I had responded by quietly, calmly, and publicly reclaiming my power. There was nothing more to be said. I gave a small, dignified nod to Pastor Brown, who was looking at me with a new and profound respect in his eyes. I offered a warm, genuine smile to my church family. "Thank you all so much for this wonderful celebration," I said, my voice full of a grace I did not feel. "You have all made this a birthday I will truly never forget." Then, without another glance at my son or his wife, I turned and walked out of the hall, my head held high, leaving them to drown in the silence I had created. The drive home through the familiar streets of Shaw was surreal. The adrenaline that had surged through me during the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind not the triumph I had expected, but a deep, hollow ache. It was not an ache for myself, but for my son. The image of his lost, confused face was seared into my mind. I grieved for the good, kind boy I had raised, the one with a quick laugh and a compassionate heart. And I grieved for the weak, easily led man he had become, a man so desperate for the approval of his shallow, materialistic wife and her arrogant family that he had been willing to publicly sacrifice his own mother on the altar of their ambition. As I drove, a new, colder thought began to crystallize in my mind. Their actions at the party, they were not just cruel. They were reckless. It was one thing to be condescending and disrespectful in private, but to do so in such a public forum, in front of the entire community, that level of arrogance suggested something more than just bad manners. It suggested a profound and unshakable belief that I was completely powerless to retaliate. They had not just assumed I was poor, they had assumed I was weak, that I was a harmless old woman who could be insulted and dismissed without consequence. Why would they be so confident? Their defaulted loan was a massive liability, a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. Why would they choose that moment to deliberately provoke the one person who held the power to bring it crashing down? It didn't make sense. Unless they believed they had a way to remove the sword entirely. A way to neutralize not just the debt, but the debtor. A chilling, ugly suspicion began to form in the pit of my stomach. Their attack at the party wasn't just a random act of cruelty, it was a strategy. It was the beginning of a narrative, a public campaign to paint me as a senile, out-of-touch old woman. It was a foundation being laid for something far more sinister. Back in the quiet, familiar comfort of my apartment behind the flower shop, I felt the last of my grief burn away, replaced by the cold, clear fire of a woman preparing for war. This was no longer just about a family insult or a business loan. This was about my freedom, my autonomy, my right to my own mind. I walked over to the old rotary-style phone on my desk, a phone my son had always joked about, calling it another one of his mother's quaint, old-fashioned affectations. I picked up the heavy, black receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the number from my personal lawyer, David Chen, a brilliant, discreet man who had helped me build and manage my secret empire for the last 20 years. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert, even late on a Saturday evening. "Virginia," he said, "is everything all right?" "No, David," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "Everything is not all right. We have a problem. I need you to find out everything you can about the recent legal and financial activities of Reginald and Genevieve Wainwright. And while you're at it, check on their son-in-law, my son, Andre Henderson." I paused, the ugly suspicion in my mind now taking full form. "Specifically, David, I want to know if they have made any inquiries, any at all, regarding the legal process for establishing a conservatorship." The word hung in the air between us, a declaration of the new, terrifying battlefield on which this war would be fought. This was no longer a fight for my money. It was a fight for my life. I returned home from my birthday party, the echoes of the stunned silence still ringing in my ears. The quiet of my small apartment, usually a comfort, now felt like the charged, breathless air before a thunderstorm. I had thrown a grenade into the middle of my own life, and I was now waiting in the eerie calm for the explosion. My actions in the church hall were not born of a calculated strategy, but of a pure instinctual need to reclaim my own dignity. But now, in the aftermath, the strategist, the engineer, the businesswoman I had kept hidden for so long began to take over. My mind, clear and cold, started to analyze the data points, and the conclusion it reached was both logical and terrifying. The attack on me had been premeditated. This was not just a family squabble. It was a hostile maneuver, and I needed to understand its full scope. The next morning, the social fallout began. My phone rang with calls from my church friends, my neighbors, my community family. Their voices were a mixture of shock, concern, and a new profound respect. "Ginny, I had no idea," my friend Martha from next door said, her voice full of awe. "You are a force of nature." They did not pry, but they offered their unwavering support, a silent, powerful affirmation of my place in the community. Their loyalty was a soothing balm on the raw wound of my own son's betrayal. In stark contrast, a single text message arrived from Danielle. It was a long, venomous tirade accusing me of humiliating her, of trying to ruin her family out of jealousy, and ending with a threat. "You have no idea what you've just started, you bitter old woman." The sheer, unadulterated rage of the message only confirmed my suspicion. I had hit a nerve. I had disrupted a plan. My lawyer, David Chen, called back later that afternoon, far sooner than I had expected. The usual warmth in his voice was gone, replaced by a grim professional chill. "Virginia," he said, "you were right to call. And your instincts were, as usual, spot on. It's worse than we thought." He had spent the morning making a few quiet, well-placed inquiries using the network of contacts we had built over 30 years, and he had found the snake's nest. "The Wainwrights didn't just talk about it," David said, his voice tight with a controlled anger. "They've already taken steps. 3 weeks ago, they had a formal consultation with a lawyer, a man who specializes in elder law and contested conservatorships." The word conservatorship landed like a physical blow. It was the legal term for my deepest fear, the stripping away of one's autonomy, the declaration that you are no longer a person, but a problem to be managed. David continued, laying out the ugly details. The Wainwrights with Danielle had begun compiling a file, a dossier of my supposed incompetence. They had documented my frugal lifestyle, my old truck, my simple clothes, my obsession with the flower shop, and were twisting it into a narrative of a senile old woman who was losing her grip, a woman incapable of managing her own, supposedly, modest affairs. Their goal was clear and monstrous: to petition a court to have me declared mentally unfit to have a conservator appointed to manage my assets. This would not only give them control of my life, but it would also conveniently allow that conservator to forgive the $3 million debt they owed me. I felt a cold sickness spread through me, but the worst was yet to come. "And Andre?" I asked, my voice a whisper, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it to face the full, unvarnished truth of my son's betrayal. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Virginia, I'm so sorry," David said, his voice softening with a genuine sadness. Andre wasn't just aware of it. He was a part of it. His name is listed as a consulting party in the lawyer's initial notes. He attended the meeting with them. The final supporting pillar of my love for my son crumbled into dust. He had not just been a weak man, a silent accomplice. He had been an active participant, He had sat in a lawyer's office and listened as they planned how to put his own mother in a legal cage. He had looked at the woman who had raised him, who had sacrificed everything for him, who had secretly built his entire career, and he had decided she was an obstacle to be removed. When I hung up the phone with my lawyer, the silence in my apartment was absolute. The city outside, with its traffic and its sirens and its ceaseless hum of life, might as well have been on another planet. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my small living room, and to the single devastating truth that now occupied it. My son, my only child, had conspired to erase me. The pain was not a hot, searing thing. It was a cold, heavy weight that settled deep in my bones, a grief so profound it felt like a geological event, shifting the very tectonic plates of my soul. I had lost my husband, James, to a sudden tragic accident. It was a clean wound, a pain I had learned to carry with honor. This was a different kind of death. This was a slow, deliberate murder of the heart, committed by the one person I had believed was my life's greatest creation. I stood up and walked, my movements stiff and robotic, to the small bookshelf in the corner. My fingers, numb and clumsy, traced the spines of the books until they found what they were looking for. It was a small, worn photo album, the kind with the sticky plastic pages. I opened it. There was Andre at 6, a gap-toothed grin on his face, holding up his first fish. Andre at 10, looking impossibly small and serious in his Little League uniform. Andre at 18, tall and proud in his cap and gown at his high school graduation. I looked at the face of the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved with a fierceness that was the central, organizing principle of my entire life. And I tried to find a trace of the man who had sat in a lawyer's office and planned to have his own mother declared incompetent. I could not. The boy in these pictures was a ghost, a memory of someone who no longer existed, if he had ever existed at all. I closed the album, the soft puff of air as the covers met sounding like a final gentle goodbye. I was grieving the death of my son. The man who wore his face was a stranger to me now, a hostile entity, an enemy. And as the grief washed through me, it began to change. The profound, bottomless sorrow began to freeze. It was a slow chemical reaction, the pain crystallizing, hardening, becoming something else entirely. It became a cold, clear, and diamond-hard rage. The engineer in me, the strategist who had been dormant for so long, finally, fully awoke. My home, my life, my very freedom were under a coordinated, hostile attack. A family tragedy had just been reclassified in my mind. It was now a business problem. And I was very, very good at solving business problems. I had been a victim for long enough. Now, I would be a warrior. I picked up the phone and dialed David Chen again. The man who answered was not the grieving mother who had whispered her fears a few hours ago. He was VH, Henderson's CEO, and she was ready to go to war. "David," I said, and my voice was devoid of all tremor, all emotion, change of plans. "We are no longer on the defensive. We are launching a counteroffensive. I want you to listen very carefully." I began to lay out the strategy, my mind working with a swift, surgical precision. The plan came to me fully formed, a perfect blueprint of retribution. First, I began, we cut off the enemy's supply lines. My son's accounting firm has an $800,000 line of credit with Citi Trust Bank. I am the sole personal guarantor on that loan. I want my name, my assets, and my guarantee removed from that line of credit. I want you to do it first thing tomorrow morning. "Virginia," David said, his voice cautious, "that will effectively freeze his entire operation. He won't be able to make payroll." "I am aware of that," I said, my voice like ice. "Second, we dismantle the business itself. For the last 5 years, I have been the primary source of his clientele. I have the files here. His 5 largest accounts, the ones that make up 70% of his annual revenue, are all either subsidiary companies that I own a controlling interest in, or they are the personal accounts of individuals who are deeply financially loyal to me. Tomorrow, I want you to draft letters to all 5 of them. Inform them that Henderson Financial is launching a new in-house wealth management and accounting division, and that as a courtesy to our most valued partners, we will be handling their accounts personally from now on at a reduced rate for the first year. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Virginia, David said finally, his voice full of a new awe. That will not just freeze his business, that will gut it. I am aware of that, I repeated. Finally, the Wainwrights. The time for quiet requests and overdue notices is over. I want you to file a lawsuit for the immediate and full repayment of the $3 million principal, plus all accrued interest, and the maximum allowable penalties for default. I want liens placed on all of their assets, effective immediately. The restaurants, their house in Prince George's County, their vacation property, their cars, everything. I want to own every last thing they have until my money is returned to me. David was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure this is what you want? He asked, his professional duty compelling him to ask the question one last time. This is scorched earth, Virginia. I looked at the photo album, at the face of the boy I had lost. They came from my mind, David, I said softly. They came from my freedom. They tried to put me in a cage to fatten their own bank accounts. Mercy is a privilege they have not earned. This is not scorched earth. This is a controlled demolition. Burn it all to the ground. The decision was made. The war was declared. The finality of my own command. Burn it all to the ground. Hung in the air. A quiet, chilling promise. I felt no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. The woman who had spent a lifetime absorbing the pain of others, who had prioritized peace over her own dignity, was gone. In her place was VH. Henderson, a woman who understood that in business, as in life, there are moments when a strategic, overwhelming show of force is the only language your opponent will understand. I authorized David to proceed with all 3 phases of the counteroffensive. The quiet war had begun, and the first shot would be fired at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning. The next day, my son Andre was in his office, a sleek, modern space in a downtown high-rise that I had, of course, secretly helped him secure. He was in the middle of a meeting with a new, promising client, projecting the easy confidence of a man who believed he was the sole architect of his own success. He was, as I had intended for him to be, a portrait of the self-made man. It was a beautiful, fragile illusion, and it was about to be shattered. His private line rang, a call from the senior manager at his bank, a man with whom Andre had a friendly golf outing relationship. Andre answered, a smile in his voice. Bob, good to hear from you, he began before the cold official tone on the other end of the line stopped him. Mr. Henderson, the banker said, the usual warmth gone, replaced by a clipped professional frost. I'm calling to inform you of a change in the status of your business's line of credit. A change? Andre asked, his smile faltering. Is there a problem? There is, the banker said. As of 9:01 a.m. this morning, we received official notification from your loan guarantor, VH Henderson Financial, that they are withdrawing their guarantee, effective immediately. As that guarantee was the primary collateral for your $800,000 credit line, the bank is exercising its right to freeze all associated funds pending a full review of your company's solvency. Andre laughed, a short, nervous sound of disbelief. My guarantor? What are you talking about? My company is the guarantor. My credit is impeccable. There was a cool, almost pitying silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Henderson, the banker said slowly, as if speaking to a child. With all due respect, your credit was impeccable because it was backed by the full faith and credit of one of our most valued and powerful clients. Without the Henderson financial guarantee, the bank views your firm's debt-to-asset ratio as a significant risk. Your accounts are frozen. I'm sorry. The line went dead. In that single devastating phone call, the entire artifice of Andre's success was ripped away. He was not a self-made man. He was a subsidized project, a business propped up by the invisible, powerful hand of the mother he had just betrayed. The realization was a physical blow, sucking the air from his lungs, the blood from his face. He stumbled out of the meeting, mumbling an excuse, and locked himself in his office. He tried to access his accounts online, frozen. He tried to pay a supplier, denied. His business, his entire professional identity was dead in the water, and he hadn't even seen the iceberg coming. He fled his office and rushed home, a storm of panic and disbelief raging within him. He found Danielle in the middle of an online shopping spree, happily spending the money she believed was rightfully hers. "Something's happened," he stammered, his voice tight with a terror she had never heard before. "The bank. They've frozen everything. They said something about a guarantor. Henderson Financial. What the hell is Henderson Financial?" Danielle looked up from her laptop, a diamond bracelet she had been admiring shining on the screen. Her expression was one of pure, arrogant confusion. "Henderson Financial? What are you talking about? Your mother is a florist. She sells roses out of a bucket. What could she possibly have to do with your bank?" Her complete and utter ignorance, her inability to see me as anything more than the folksy, simple-minded caricature she had created, was a perfect illustration of the arrogance that had led them to this point. They had underestimated their opponent so completely, so fundamentally, that they couldn't even comprehend the nature of the weapon that was now being used against them. Finally, in a last desperate act, Andre did what he should have done from the very beginning. He tried to call his mother. He snatched his phone, his hands trembling, and dialed the number he knew by heart, the number that had always been a source of unconditional love and support. He was not calling to apologize. He was calling to demand an explanation, to fix this, to make the world make sense again. But the familiar, comforting ring he expected never came. The call was immediately forwarded. A calm, professional voice, a voice he did not recognize, answered, "Law offices of David Chen. How may I direct your call?" Andre was stunned into silence. I'm trying to reach Virginia Henderson," he stammered. "I'm sorry," the voice replied, cool and impassive. "But all communication with Mrs. Henderson must now be directed through her legal counsel. May I ask who is calling?" He hung up the phone. He was cut off. Financially, and now personally. He and Danielle stood in the silent, opulent living room of their soon-to-be-lost mansion, the first casualties in a war they hadn't even known they were fighting. And the terrifying, dawning realization began to settle in. The quiet, tasteless old woman they had mocked and schemed against was not the person they thought she was. She was someone else entirely. And she was just getting started. The first phase of my counteroffensive had been a success. By freezing Andre's line of credit, I had not just crippled his business, I had shattered his most cherished illusion, the myth of his own self-made success. It was a necessary, painful first strike, but it was only the beginning. A hostile entity had invaded my territory, and my goal was not just to repel it, but to ensure it could never threaten my borders again. The next phase of the operation was designed to dismantle the very structure of his professional life, a structure I had secretly and painstakingly built for him over the years. It was time to reclaim my assets. From the quiet command center of my apartment, I worked with my lawyer, David Chen, to draft the letters. They were masterpieces of corporate politesse, elegant, professional, and utterly ruthless. They were sent via courier the next morning to the 5 most important clients of Andre's accounting firm. These were not just any clients. They were the pillars of his business, the major accounts that had, in his own words, put him on the map. What he never knew was that I was the one who had drawn that map. Each of those 5 clients, a successful chain of local restaurants, a major real estate developer, a private physicians group, were all businesses in which Henderson Financial held a significant and often silent ownership stake. Their loyalty was not to my son, the competent but unremarkable accountant. Their loyalty was to me, the invisible force that had guaranteed their own financial success for years. The letters were simple. They announced with a quiet and understated confidence the launch of Henderson Financial's new exclusive in-house wealth management and accounting division. They spoke of synergy, of streamlined services, and of the direct personal oversight of V.H. Henderson herself. And then, in the final killing paragraph, the letter offered to take over their accounts from Andre's firm and manage them at a significantly reduced rate for the first fiscal year, as a gesture of appreciation for their long and valued partnership with me. It was not a request. It was a recall. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Andre had spent the morning in a frantic, panicked state, trying and failing to get past the legal firewall I had erected around myself. He was still reeling from the shock of his frozen accounts when the first email landed in his inbox around noon. It was from the real estate developer, a man Andre considered a friend and a mentor. The email was brief and brutal. Andre just received a letter from V.H. Henderson. Had no idea that was your mother. In light of this, we'll be moving our accounts to her new division, effective immediately. Nothing personal, it's just business. Then came the second email from the restaurant chain. Then the third from the physicians group. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, he had received the same email from all 5 clients. In the space of a few hours, 70% of his company's revenue had vanished. His business was not just frozen, it had been eviscerated. The financial pressure, which had been a looming threat, was now an avalanche. That evening, the carefully constructed facade of Andre and Danielle's perfect marriage began to crack under the strain. He came home, a defeated, terrified man, to a wife who had no capacity for empathy, only a bottomless appetite for luxury. He told her what had happened, his voice trembling as he explained that his biggest clients, his entire professional foundation, had evaporated. Danielle's reaction was not one of sympathy or support. It was one of pure accusatory rage. "What do you mean they left?" she shrieked, her voice a shrill, ugly sound. "Who the hell is V.H. Henderson? You told me you were a success. You told me your mother was a nobody who sold flowers. Was that all a lie?" The irony of her accusing him of lying was apparently lost on her. "You have to fix this, Andre," she screamed. "My parents are counting on us." "I did not marry a failure." The cracks in their own foundation, a foundation built not on love but on a shared ambition and a mutual sense of entitlement, were beginning to show. And my quiet, methodical demolition was just getting started. With Andre's business life in a terminal state, my focus shifted to the third and final phase of the demolition, the architects of the conspiracy, Reginald and Genevieve Wainwright. My son had been a willing accomplice, a weak and malleable tool, but the greed, the arrogance, the sheer, breathtaking malice of the plot to have me declared incompetent that had been born in the lavish, debt-ridden living room of their prince. George's County mansion? Andre's punishment was the loss of a career I had built for him. Theirs would be the loss of an entire empire they had built on lies. The legal action was swift and overwhelming. David Chen, my lawyer, was a master of his craft. The lawsuit for the immediate repayment of the $3 million loan was filed, and with it, a series of liens that descended upon the Wainwrights' life like a pack of wolves. Their 2 popular restaurants, the source of their social standing and public identity, were the first to be targeted. Then came the house, their sprawling monument to superficial wealth. Their luxury cars, their investment portfolios, their private club memberships, every asset, every symbol of the life they so desperately prized was instantly frozen, entangled in a legal net from which there was no escape. The official summons was delivered to their door by a process server, a formal legal declaration that their time of living on my money and my mercy was over. The arrogant confidence of the Wainwrights, I knew, was a fragile thing, a thin veneer of superiority over a deep well of insecurity. I expected their panic. I did not, however, expect them to be so foolish as to try and contact me directly. But 2 days after the lawsuit was filed, my private, unlisted phone number rang. It was a number known only to my mother, my daughter, and my most trusted inner circle. Andre must have given it to them in a moment of shared, desperate panic. I looked at the unfamiliar number and I knew who it was. I answered, my voice calm and neutral. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. It was Genevieve Wainwright, but the haughty, condescending tone I had endured for years was gone. In its place was the raw, weeping desperation of a woman whose world was on fire. "Virginia," she sobbed into the phone. "Virginia, thank God. You have to call this off, please. It's a mistake. The lawyers, the liens, they're going to take everything." I listened in silence as she poured out a frantic, incoherent torrent of pleas and excuses. She spoke of family, a word that was now a toxic poison on her lips. She spoke of her love for Danielle, for Andre, as if that love was a currency she could now use to buy my mercy. "We're family, Virginia. You can't do this to family," she wailed. "You'll destroy us. You'll destroy your son's life, your own grandchild's future. Is that what you want?" It was a masterful performance of a victim, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to seize the moral high ground, to paint me as the villain, the cold, vengeful matriarch destroying her own kin. A year ago, her tears might have moved me. Her appeals to family loyalty might have made me question my own resolve. But I was not the same woman. I had been forged into something new in the fires of their betrayal. I let her finish, her sobs finally subsiding into ragged, hitching breaths. The silence stretched, and I could hear her desperate, hopeful waiting on the other end of the line. "Are you finished?" I asked, and my voice was so cold, so devoid of emotion, that it seemed to startle her into silence. "Virginia, please," she whispered. "You had a chance to be family, Genevieve," I said, my words slow, deliberate, and as sharp and clear as ice. "You had a chance to be a part of my son's life, a grandmother to my future grandchildren. Instead, you and your husband sat in a lawyer's office and plotted to have me stripped of my rights, my freedom, and my own mind. You whispered in my son's ear, and you poisoned him against me. You tried to steal my life's work, and you did it all while smiling to my face and drinking my tea in my own kitchen." I paused, letting the ugly truth of her actions settle in the space between us. "So, you will forgive me if I no longer consider this a family matter. This is a business transaction. You took a loan, you defaulted, and now you are facing the consequences." "But we'll be ruined," she whimpered. "Yes," I said, "you will." The finality of my own words was a chilling, liberating thing. In business, Genevieve, enemies do not receive mercy. They receive what they have earned. The full amount of the loan, plus all accrued interest and penalties, is due in 30 days. After that, my company will take possession of every asset the court allows. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Do not call this number again." I hung up the phone before she could say another word, the click of the receiver a final, satisfying sound. The last emotional appeal, the final attempt at manipulation, had been made, and it had failed. I felt no triumph, no joy, just the cold, clean satisfaction of a difficult job well done. The demolition was almost complete. The 30-day deadline I had given the Wainwrights came and went, the silence from their end a testament to their desperation and their disbelief. They had, it seemed, truly believed until the final hour that I would relent, that my womanly emotions would override my business sense, that their tearful appeals to a family they had tried to destroy would somehow save them. They were, like so many arrogant people, catastrophically wrong. On the 31st day, David Chen, my lawyer, executed the final phase of the legal strategy with the swift, impersonal efficiency of a guillotine. The full weight of the law, backed by the full weight of my financial empire, descended upon them. The collapse of the Wainwright dynasty was as swift as it was total. I watched from a distance, receiving updates from David like dispatches from a foreign war. Their 2 restaurants, the twin pillars of their social identity, were the first to go, sold off in a bankruptcy auction for a fraction of their value to a rival restaurant group. Next came the mansion, their monument to bad taste and borrowed money. It was foreclosed on, and as the primary creditor, my company took possession of the deed. I had no interest in the house itself, a place so full of bad memories, and instructed David to sell it at the earliest opportunity, the proceeds to be credited against the still outstanding debt. Their luxury cars were repossessed in the dead of night. Their social club memberships were revoked for non-payment. In the space of a month, Reginald and Genevieve Wainwright were transformed from pillars of the Prince George's County social scene into pariahs, their carefully constructed world of wealth and status revealed to be nothing more than a house of cards, and I was the hurricane that had blown it all down. The fallout for Andre and Danielle was just as devastating. With his business gutted and his credit destroyed, Andre was unable to sustain the massive mortgage on their own lavish home. The eviction notice came, a final humiliating punctuation mark on his failed professional life. They lost everything. The house, the cars, the designer clothes, the entire apparatus of the successful life they had so arrogantly flaunted in my face. The fall from grace was brutal and public, and as the financial walls caved in, so too did the walls of their family. The alliance, forged in a shared sense of entitlement and greed, could not withstand the pressure of failure. I heard about the final ugly implosion from a former neighbor who still called to check on me. She had witnessed a screaming match between Andre and his in-laws in the street as movers emptied their house. The accusations were bitter and loud. The Wainwrights blamed Andre, their useless, spineless son-in-law, for failing to control his own mother. He, in turn, screamed at them for their greed, for their stupidity, for dragging him into their disastrous, half-baked scheme to have me declared incompetent. The family they had all claimed to be protecting, the family they had accused me of destroying, was revealed to be what I had always suspected it was: a shallow, transactional arrangement that had just gone bankrupt. Danielle was caught in the middle, weeping, her loyalties torn, her entire world a smoldering ruin. I listened to these reports not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, detached sadness. There was no joy in their destruction, no satisfaction in their pain. The engineer in me saw it simply as a structural failure. Their lives had been built on a faulty foundation of arrogance, disrespect, and greed. Its collapse was not a tragedy. It was an inevitability. My actions had not been the cause of the collapse. I had simply been the force of nature, the earthquake that had exposed the pre-existing fatal flaws in their design. My sadness was for my son, for the good man he might have been if he had not been so easily led, so desperate for the approval of such small, hollow people. A week later, I stood in a large, empty space on the 12th floor of a new skyscraper downtown, the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the Washington Monument was spectacular. My lawyer, David, stood beside me, a set of blueprints in his hand. This was to be the new public headquarters of Henderson Financial Consulting. For 40 years, my empire had been a secret, a quiet, powerful force moving beneath the surface of the city. Now, the time for hiding was over. The humble disguise of Mama Ginny, the florist, was being retired. I was stepping into the light, into my full power, into my true identity. I looked out at the city skyline, a landscape I knew intimately, a landscape I had helped to build. The external threats had been neutralized. The demolition was complete. Now, the harder, more complex work of rebuilding my own life, of figuring out what it meant to be just Virginia Henderson could begin. The 6 months that followed the demolition of my old life were a period of rapid, exhilarating construction. The quiet, unassuming facade of Mama Ginny the florist was dismantled, and in its place, the true structure of my life was finally revealed to the world. The grand opening of Henderson Financial Consulting's new headquarters was a major event in the DC business community. There were articles in business journals, profiles written about the secret financial powerhouse, who had been hiding in plain sight in a Shaw flower shop. I did not shy away from the attention. I embraced it. For the first time, I allowed my two identities, the nurturing community anchor and the brilliant, formidable CEO, to merge into one whole, authentic person. My new life was fuller and richer than I could have ever imagined. It was a life of purpose, lived on my own terms. I spent my days managing my firm, my mind sharp and engaged, my decades of experience now being put to use on a grand scale. I took a special interest in mentoring young, ambitious entrepreneurs, particularly women of color, who saw in me a reflection of what was possible. I established a foundation in my late husband's name, funding scholarships and community programs in the neighborhood that had been my home and my incubator for so long. My life was no longer about managing the fragile ego of one man. It was about building a legacy. The final administrative tie to my old life was severed on a Tuesday afternoon with a quiet email from my lawyer. The divorce was finalized. Andre had not contested any of it. He had signed the papers without a fight. Reading the email, I felt no surge of victory, no lingering sadness. It felt like reading a notice that a building you once lived in, a building that had been condemned for months, had finally, officially, been taken off the city records. It was a simple, necessary piece of paperwork. I archived the email and went back to analyzing a quarterly report. I had built a new family, a new community, around me, one based not on obligation or blood, but on mutual respect and shared values. My friendship with the women from my church, my neighbors, and my new business associates was a source of constant joy and support. The loneliness I had feared, the emptiness I thought would consume me, never materialized. My life was full. My heart was at peace. I had everything I had ever wanted. I had simply, tragically, been looking for it in the wrong house for 30 years. I had thought my purpose was to be a wife and a mother. I had discovered that my true purpose was to be myself. The day the divorce was finalized, I did not celebrate. I did not feel a surge of victory. I simply felt a quiet sense of closure, the feeling of a long, difficult, and ultimately successful project finally being signed off on. I was in my office, a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city I loved, when the email came. I read it, archived it, and went back to my work. My life had already moved on, and the legal paperwork was merely catching up to the reality I had already created for myself. I was the master of my own empire, an empire built not of steel and glass, but of resilience and self-respect. That evening, I left my office late, my mind still buzzing with the details of a new philanthropic initiative my foundation was launching. The lobby of my building was a quiet, soaring space of marble and polished steel, a world away from the humble charm of my old flower shop. It was a space that radiated power and success, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged in it. As I walked towards the glass doors, I saw them. They were sitting on one of the plush, modern sofas, looking small and out of place in the vast, intimidating space. It was Andre and Danielle. My first instinct was a flash of irritation. This was my space, my sanctuary. They were ghosts from a past I had firmly put behind me. But then I looked at them, really looked at them, and the irritation faded, replaced by a sense of profound and startling pity. They were no longer the golden, arrogant couple who had held court at my birthday party. The expensive designer clothes they wore were the same, but they hung differently on them, like costumes from a play that had long since closed. They looked exhausted, humbled, and diminished. The fire of their arrogance had been extinguished, leaving behind only the cold gray ash of their consequences. They stood up as I approached, their movements tentative, uncertain. Andre, my son, who had always moved with such easy, athletic confidence, now seemed unsure of how to hold himself, his hands clasped awkwardly in front of him. "Mom," he began, his voice shaky, a sound so full of a raw, broken regret that it pierced the cold armor around my heart. "Thank you for agreeing to see us. I had not agreed to see them. They had ambushed me." But I simply nodded, my expression neutral, waiting. "I know. I know an apology is not enough," he stammered, his eyes pleading with me. "I know what I did, what I allowed to happen, was unforgivable. I was a coward. I was weak. I was so blinded by Danielle's world, by my father's ideas of what a man should be, that I forgot what it meant to be a son. I lost everything, Mom. The business, the house, all of it. And you know what? I deserved it. Because in the process, I lost the only thing that ever really mattered. I lost you." Then, Danielle, who had been standing silently, her eyes fixed on the floor, took a trembling step forward. The proud, haughty woman who had hissed insults at me in a church hall was gone. In her place was a young woman who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Mrs. Henderson," she began, her voice a raw whisper, "there is no excuse for how I treated you. The things I said, they came from a place of deep insecurity and jealousy. I was intimidated by you, by your strength, by your quiet confidence. I didn't understand it, and so I tried to tear it down. It was a cruel, ugly, and unforgivable thing to do, and I will be ashamed of it for the rest of my life." She took a shaky breath, and tears began to stream down her face. "We didn't just lose the house and the money," she wept. "We lost ourselves. We became these horrible, greedy people, and we deserved everything that happened to us." Andre put a comforting hand on her shoulder, and it was in that small, supportive gesture that I saw the first glimmer of a change in him, the first sign of the man I had once known. They were not just here to apologize, they were here to beg, but not for money, for something far more precious. Andre looked at me, his face full of a desperate, terrifying hope. "We have a son, Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "He was born 3 months ago. His name is Isaiah." The news was a quiet explosion in the silent lobby. "A grandson. My grandson. He's the reason we're here," Andre continued. "Not for us. For him. I don't want him to grow up without his grandmother. I don't want him to grow up in a family poisoned by this bitterness, by this shame." I listened to them, my face an unreadable mask, my heart a raging sea of conflicting emotions. The nurturing Mama Ginny ached to see her grandson, to embrace her broken son, but V.H. Henderson, the CEO, the survivor, the woman who had fought her way back from the brink, knew that mercy without boundaries was just an invitation for history to repeat itself. I looked at their 2 pleading, broken faces, and I made a decision. I looked at my son and his wife, 2 broken people standing in the opulent lobby of the empire I had built. They had come to me as supplicants, offering their apologies and the existence of my grandson as a plea for mercy. Their remorse, I believed, was genuine. The brutal reality of their consequences had been a harsh but effective teacher. The old me, the woman who had spent a lifetime prioritizing the comfort of others over her own truth, the Mama Ginny who had poured every ounce of her love into her son, would have opened her arms. She would have wept with them, offered them immediate forgiveness, and invited them back into the fold, her heart soothed by the simple, powerful pull of family. But that woman was gone. She had died in the cold, clarifying fire of their betrayal. The woman who stood before them now was V.H. Henderson, and V.H. Henderson understood that a structure built on a rotten foundation, no matter how beautifully patched, is doomed to collapse again. To offer them an easy, emotional absolution now would not be an act of love. It would be an act of foolishness. It would be an invitation for history to repeat itself. I had not fought this hard, had not burned my old life to the ground just to rebuild the same unstable structure. If my family was to be rebuilt, it would be to a new, more rigorous code on a foundation of accountability and unflinching honesty. I let them stand in the silence for a long moment, their hopeful, frightened eyes fixed on my face. My own expression remained calm, measured, and unreadable. When I finally spoke, my voice was not the warm, folksy tone of Mama Ginny. It was the quiet, firm, and non-negotiable voice of a CEO laying out the terms of a very serious contract. "I have heard your apologies," I began, my voice steady, echoing slightly in the vast, quiet space. "And I believe you are sincere in your regret. But your regret is a consequence of your failure. It does not erase the choices you made." I looked directly at Andre. "You chose to participate in a conspiracy to have your own mother stripped of her legal and mental freedom. You chose to publicly humiliate me. You chose to stand by in silence while your wife called me a tasteless old woman." Then I turned my gaze to Danielle. "And you," I said, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its steel, "chose to treat me with a contempt and a cruelty that was born of your own insecurity. You saw my quiet life not as a choice, but as a weakness to be exploited." I let the weight of their actions settle on them again, a necessary reminder of the ground on which we now stood. "Because of that," I continued, "forgiveness is not a gift I can simply give you tonight. It is not something you are owed. It is something that, if you are very lucky, you might be able to earn back over a very long time." I saw a flicker of despair in Andre's eyes, but I held up a hand to stop him from speaking. I was not finished. "If there is to be any path forward, it will be on my terms, and my terms are not negotiable. First, you will both begin family therapy immediately. You will go together, and you will each go separately. You need to understand the roots of your own behavior, the weakness and the arrogance that led you here, before you can ever hope to build a healthy family for your son. I will require a monthly report from your therapist." Their eyes widened, but they did not protest. "Second," I said, "there will be no more financial secrets. I will help you get back on your feet for my grandson's sake, not for yours. But it will not be a gift. It will be a structured loan from my foundation with a clear and aggressive repayment plan. You will learn the value of $1 because you will earn it, and you will account for every single one you spend. Third, our relationship, if we are to have one at all, will be one of probationary contact. It will be built on a foundation of absolute, brutal honesty. The moment I sense a manipulation, the moment I detect even a hint of the old entitlement, it is over. Permanently. Do you understand?" They both nodded, their faces pale, their expressions a mixture of shock and a dawning, humbling gratitude. They were not being welcomed back with open arms. They were being offered the slimmest, most difficult path back from the wilderness. It was more than they deserved. There was one final term. "I will see my grandson," I said, my voice softening for the first time. The CEO was receding, and the grandmother was emerging. "You may bring Isaiah to my home this Sunday for 1 hour. We will begin there. Your right to be a family with me and with him is something you will earn, day by day." Andre finally found his voice, a choked whisper. "We will," he said. "Mom will do anything." "Thank you." I simply gave a curt nod. The transaction was complete. They turned and walked away, two chastened figures retreating from the citadel of power they had once tried to conquer. I was left alone in the magnificent, silent lobby of my empire, not with a sense of triumphant victory, but with the quiet, heavy reality of my new role. The battle was over. The war for my dignity had been won. But the long, difficult work of being the matriarch, of guiding a broken family back towards the light, was just beginning. The first Sunday after our meeting in the lobby felt like a formal diplomatic summit. My apartment, which had become my fortress of solitude and peace, was about to be tested, its borders open for the first time to the very people I had fought so hard to expel. I spent the morning in a state of quiet, controlled apprehension. A part of me, the grandmother I had not yet had a chance to be, was filled with a nervous, fluttering excitement at the prospect of meeting my grandson. But another, larger part, the CEO, who had just survived a hostile takeover attempt, was wary, alert, and acutely aware of the need to maintain control of the situation. I was not hosting a family reunion. I was chairing a probationary hearing. They arrived at precisely 2:00, their punctuality a small, clear sign of their adherence to my new rules. They stood in my doorway, Andre holding a car seat, Danielle clutching a diaper bag, and they looked like two nervous employees about to have a performance review with a formidable boss. The shift in the power dynamic was absolute and palpable. I had once been the one who was nervous in their presence, the one who measured her words and moderated her behavior to appease them. Now, they were the ones walking on eggshells in my world. "Come in," I said, my voice polite but neutral, stepping aside to let them into the entryway. I did not offer to help them with their things. I did not rush to embrace them. I simply led them into the living room, a space that was so completely and utterly me, with its bold colors, its modern art, its shelves overflowing with books, that it served as an immediate, unspoken declaration of my independence. Then I saw him. Tucked into the car seat, sleeping peacefully, was the smallest, most perfect human being I had ever seen. My grandson, Isaiah. Andre lifted him out, and Danielle, with a gesture of hesitant trust, held him out to me. "He's been sleeping all morning," she whispered. I reached out and took the small, warm, blanket-wrapped bundle into my arms, and in that moment, the cold, hard armor I had built around my heart for the last year developed a crack. He was so tiny, his face a perfect miniature fusion of my son's features, and a strength that I hope came from me. As he stirred, his tiny hand uncurled and wrapped around my finger, his grip surprisingly strong. A wave of love so fierce, so primal, it was almost painful, washed over me. This was family. This was the future. This was the one undeniable reason to even consider the long, difficult road of reconciliation. The hour passed in a stilted but civil formality. They presented me with the first report from their family therapist, a dry, clinical document that I placed on my coffee table without reading immediately. They spoke of their new, humbler life, of the small apartment they had rented, of the budget they were now forced to live on. It was a clear, deliberate act of transparency and adherence to the terms I had set. I listened. I nodded. I asked a few clarifying questions. It was the conversation of a banker reviewing a loan application, not a mother talking to her son. As the hour drew to a close and they began to gather their things, Danielle paused by the large, abstract painting that hung over my sofa. "That's beautiful," she said, her voice quiet, genuine. "The colors are so joyful." It was a small thing, a simple compliment. But it was the first time she had ever acknowledged my taste as anything other than something to be criticized or improved. It was a tiny, fragile olive branch, an acknowledgement that she was in my world now, and she was, at last, trying to see it through my eyes. I gave her a small, brief smile. "Thank you," I said. "I like it very much." The visit was over. The first tentative step on a long and uncertain journey had been taken. As I closed the door behind them, the scent of baby powder lingering in the air, I looked at the therapist's report, still sitting on my table. The work would be hard. But as I remembered the feel of my grandson's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I knew for the first time that it was work I was willing to do. The year that followed was not a story of dramatic reunions or tearful movie-perfect forgiveness. It was a slow, quiet, and often difficult process of rebuilding, a painstaking architectural project undertaken on the scorched earth of our old life. Trust, I learned, is not rebuilt with grand gestures, but with the small, consistent, and often tedious work of showing up, of being honest, and of respecting the hard-won boundaries that had been established. The Sunday visits became a fixed point in our new universe. Every week at 2 o'clock, Andre and Danielle would arrive with Isaiah, and for 1, then 2, then eventually several hours, we would practice being a family again. The initial formality slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to thaw. The stilted, businesslike conversations gave way to a more relaxed, if still cautious, cadence. They brought me the weekly reports from their therapist, and I read every single one. I saw in the clinical, professional language the story of their struggle. Andre's long journey to untangle his own identity from the suffocating expectations of his father, Danielle's painful confrontation with her own deep-seated classism and insecurity. They were doing the work. It was slow, and it was hard, but they were not giving up. Freed from the crushing weight of his father's influence and the relentless pressure to maintain a life he couldn't afford, a new version of my son began to emerge. He was quieter, humbler, and more thoughtful than the man he had been. He shut down his failed accounting firm and took a job with a community-based nonprofit that helped low-income families with financial literacy. The pay was a fraction of what he once made, but for the first time he spoke about his work with a genuine passion. He was helping people, not just managing the assets of the wealthy. He was learning to live within his means, to find value not in the car he drove or the suit he wore, but in the man he was becoming. Danielle's transformation was, in some ways, even more profound. With their single income, she had to go back to work. She took a job as an administrative assistant at a local elementary school. The woman who had once sneered at my humble life was now packing her own lunch and budgeting for groceries. The experience did not embitter her. It grounded her. She began to develop a quiet confidence that was not tied to her parents' wealth or her husband's status. It was her own. Her relationship with her parents became strained as she no longer had the patience for their materialistic, judgmental worldview. Her conversations with me began to change. She started asking for my advice, not about business, but about motherhood, about how to raise a good, kind boy in a difficult world. She was finally beginning to see me not as a rival or a resource, but as a mother, a grandmother, as family. The true bridge between our fractured worlds, however, was Isaiah. As he grew from a sleepy infant into a curious, toddling boy, his innocent, uncomplicated love for his Gigi became the glue that began to piece our family back together. My apartment, once my fortress of solitude, became his playground. The quiet peace of my life was joyfully disrupted by the happy chaos of his visits. The sound of his laughter, a constant, beautiful music. In my time with him, I was not the formidable V.H. Henderson CEO. I was simply Gigi. I would get down on the floor with him, my knees creaking, and we would build towers of blocks. I would read him stories in the back room of the flower shop, the scent of roses and his clean baby smell, a potent, intoxicating perfume of hope. He was the future, a clean slate, a chance to build a new family legacy, one based not on secrets and lies, but on a hard-won, honest love. The true turning point came on his first birthday. The party was not the lavish, catered affair the old Danielle would have thrown. It was a small, simple gathering in their tiny apartment, filled with a few friends and the smell of a homemade cake. I walked in and saw Andre and Danielle moving around the small space, a seamless, supportive team. I watched as he comforted a crying Isaiah, his touch gentle and sure. I watched as she laughed, a real, unforced laugh, at a joke a friend made. At one point, she caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, genuine smile, a look of shared, quiet understanding. There was no artifice, no performance. They were not perfect. They were not yet fully healed. But they were real. They were a family, building a new, more honest life on the foundations of their own failure. And I knew as I watched my grandson smear cake all over his happy face that the work, as hard as it had been, was worth it. Another 3 years passed, each one a quiet, steady brick in the new foundation of our family. The probationary period, with its rigid rules and weekly therapy reports, had long since ended, replaced by a new dynamic built, not on my terms, but on a shared and deeply earned respect. The journey had not been easy. There had been setbacks, old patterns that tried to resurface, difficult conversations that had to be had, but through it all, they had persevered. They had done the hard, unglamorous work of healing, and in doing so, they had slowly, painstakingly earned back my trust. The final scene of our story, the one that told me our new structure was sound, took place not on a holiday or a special occasion, but on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Sunday dinners at my apartment had become our new tradition. The tension of those first stilted visits was now a distant memory, replaced by an easy, comfortable warmth. The air in my home was filled with the scent of a roast chicken, the sound of my son's happy, booming laughter, and the high-pitched, excited chatter of my grandson Isaiah, who was now a bright and curious 4-year-old. I watched my family from the kitchen as I put the finishing touches on dinner. Andre and Danielle were sitting on the floor with their son, helping him build an elaborate tower out of blocks. I saw the easy, supportive way they worked together, the shared, loving glance they exchanged over their son's head. They were a team. The broken, frightened people who had shown up in my lobby years ago were gone. In their place were 2 resilient adults who had learned the hard lessons of humility and accountability. They had built a new, smaller, but infinitely more honest life for themselves, and they were happy. Later, as we sat around the dinner table, Isaiah, who had spent the previous afternoon helping me at the flower shop, looked at me with the unfiltered, serious curiosity of a child. "Gigi," he asked, "why do you still have the little flower shop? You have a big, tall building with your name on it." Andre and Danielle both tensed for a moment, a flicker of the old anxiety in their eyes. But I just smiled. It was a question I had often asked myself. I had more money than I could ever spend. My firm was more successful than I had ever dreamed. I had no practical need for the long hours and hard physical work of running a small retail business. But I kept it. I kept it for a reason. I looked at my grandson, at his bright, innocent face, and I told him the truth. "I keep the flower shop, sweetheart," I said, "to remember. I keep it to remember the feel of good soil in my hands. I keep it to remember that the most beautiful things in the world require patience and hard work to grow. And I keep it to remember a young, scared woman who had nothing but a few buckets of roses and a belief in herself." I reached across the table and touched my son's hand. "It reminds me," I said, my eyes meeting his, "that true strength isn't always found in the tallest buildings. Sometimes it's found in the smallest, most stubborn gardens." Andre looked at me, and his eyes filled with a deep, quiet understanding, a love and a respect that had been earned, not inherited. That evening, after they had gone, I stood by the large window in my living room, the same window where I had once planned my war. I looked out at the glittering panorama of the Washington, D.C. skyline, the monuments glowing in the soft twilight. The city was a testament to power, to ambition, to structures built to last. I had, in my own way, built an empire. But my true legacy, I knew, was not the name on the skyscraper downtown. It was the laughter that still echoed in my quiet apartment. It was the love of a son I had lost and then found again, a better, stronger man. It was the hard-won respect of a daughter-in-law who had become a friend. It was the tiny, trusting hand of a grandson who would grow up in a family built not on secrets and lies, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of truth. I was no longer just a florist, and I was no longer just a CEO. I was Virginia Henderson, a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, a survivor, a matriarch. I had been through the fire and had not been consumed. I had taken the broken pieces of my life and had built something new, something stronger, something beautiful. I was alone in my magnificent apartment, but I was not lonely. My life was full. My heart was at peace. And that was everything.